Hey guys, welcome back to Beyond the Box Score and I am your host Hayat. Today we're breaking down 4 NBA matchups on March 6th. We're diving into New York Knicks vs Denver Nuggets, Miami Heat vs Charlotte Hornets, Boston Celtics vs Dallas, and Los Angeles Lakers vs Indiana Pacers, and the goal here isn't hype or guarantees. It's simply connecting the dots between the numbers, the situations, and the trends to see where the value might show up if these games unfold the way the data suggests. And real quick before we jump in, I just want to say I appreciate everyone watching because the channel just crossed 1,700 subscribers, which is honestly amazing. Our goal is 2K subscribers, so if you enjoy these deep breakdowns and you want to see the channel keep growing, hitting that subscribe button genuinely helps more than you think. Alright, let's get into the slate and start connecting the dots. Alright, first game on the board is New York Knicks vs Denver Nuggets, and the lean here is New York Knicks. Let me walk through why this one connects for me, because when I first looked at this number I kind of stopped for a second. I mean the line is basically a pick'em. While I'm looking at it, it's essentially dead even, Nuggets laying 1 point, so we're talking about a game that the market is basically saying is coin flip territory. And normally when I see Denver Nuggets at home sitting in that pick'em range, my first instinct is to look their direction because everybody knows Denver Nuggets have great home court advantage, that altitude, that building, that environment, it's real. But what connects for me here is the scheduling situation because this specific stretch for Denver Nuggets is kind of brutal when you really lay it out piece by piece. So look at the upcoming run they're in the middle of. They play the Lakers on Thursday, then they turn around and play the New York Knicks on Friday, then after that they have the Oklahoma City Thunder waiting, then the Houston Rockets, and then the San Antonio Spurs. So the sequence is Lakers, Thursday, Knicks, Friday, Oklahoma City Thunder, Houston Rockets, San Antonio Spurs. That is not a friendly stretch. And the key piece for this specific matchup is that the Knicks game is the back end of a back-to-back for Denver. Nuggets played Lakers on Thursday and now the Knicks game is Friday. So you're talking about a turnaround spot after a tough Lakers matchup and then immediately you have to deal with a New York Knicks team that, quietly, has been playing solid basketball lately. Now I know one of the immediate pushbacks people will bring up is that the Knicks have struggled on the road. That's been part of the profile of this team for stretches of the season. But at the same time the recent trend is interesting because the New York Knicks have covered 4 straight games. And even in the last one, the loss against the Oklahoma City Thunder, they still covered in that game. So even when the scoreboard doesn't necessarily cooperate, the performance relative to expectation has still been strong. One path I see here is that the Denver Nuggets come out of that Lakers game Thursday, heavy minutes, emotional game, then immediately the Knicks show up Friday. That's a tricky turnaround. If this matchup plays out like a typical Denver Nuggets home environment game, sure, the altitude in the building could tilt things, because again Denver Nuggets do have great home court advantage. But what connects for me is the timing of it. Lakers Thursday, Knicks Friday, then looming right after that you've got Oklahoma City Thunder, Houston Rockets, San Antonio Spurs on deck. That's a packed stretch. And sometimes those spots create just a little bit of vulnerability even for strong home teams. Meanwhile the New York Knicks coming in having covered 4 straight games, including covering even in the loss against Oklahoma City Thunder, tells me this group is at least playing competitive basketball every night. So if this matchup plays out like a tight, back and forth type of game, which makes sense considering the line is basically a pick'em and Nuggets laying 1 point, I can absolutely see the Knicks hanging around the entire night and possibly finishing the job. The road struggles are real, I'm not ignoring that, but the scheduling situation for Denver is the thing that keeps pulling me back in this direction. Lakers Thursday, Knicks Friday on the back end of a back-to-back, and then that gauntlet continues with Oklahoma City Thunder, Houston Rockets, San Antonio Spurs. That's a tough 5-game stretch to manage. So when I put the pieces together, the pick'em type number, Nuggets laying 1 point, the Knicks covering 4 straight games, the loss against Oklahoma City Thunder where they still covered, the brutal schedule spot for Denver. The scenario that keeps connecting in my head is the Knicks being the fresher side in a game that could swing late. Yeah, that's why the lean sticks at New York Knicks. Alright, moving to the next matchup, Miami Heat vs Charlotte Hornets, and the lean here is Charlotte Hornets minus 4.5. Let me think this one through because there's a lot going on with this team right now. The opening number shows Hornets minus 4.5 with a total of 230.5, and immediately the conversation around this game is momentum. And the reason momentum is part of the conversation is because Charlotte Hornets are on a real run right now. This is not a small stretch either, they have covered 9 straight games and they have won 6 straight games. That's a serious heater. Now when you start digging into who they've beaten recently, the list is interesting because the wins include Dallas, Portland, Indiana, Chicago Bulls, Washington Wizards. So you see that list and maybe someone initially says okay, those are nice wins but maybe not the most intimidating opponents in the world. But then the last result changes the entire tone of the conversation because Charlotte Hornets went into Boston. The game was played in Boston, and that game itself was also the back end of a back-to-back for Charlotte. And what happened? Charlotte Hornets 118, Celtics 89. That's not just a win, that's a demolition. The Boston Celtics only put up 89 in that game, which is wild when you consider how explosive that offense can be. So now Charlotte comes out of that performance where they beat the Celtics 118-89 in Boston on the back end of a back-to-back, and now they return home to face the Miami Heat. And Miami Heat are not a bad team by any means. The record is 33-29 straight up, but the road profile is where things get interesting because Miami on the road this season sits at 14-18 straight up. So if this matchup plays out like a typical Miami road game, that's where the Hornets could control the environment a little bit. Now one path I can see people arguing is the emotional angle. Charlotte just went into Boston and crushed the Celtics 118-89, so some people might say this could be a letdown spot after that huge win. That's a fair thought process, that's definitely a narrative some analysts would lean into. But the other side of that is the trend line, and that trend line is hard to ignore because again Charlotte Hornets have covered 9 straight games and they have won 6 straight games. When a team is running that hot against the spread and also stacking wins, fading that momentum can be uncomfortable. And then the number itself comes into play because the opening line is Hornets minus 4.5 with a total of 230.5. That 4.5 range feels like the market acknowledging Charlotte's run but not overreacting too aggressively. There's also the expectation floating around that Hornets could catch steam in the market and the line could jump up a point or two by the time the game tips off. So if this matchup plays out like the recent Charlotte performances where they're pushing pace, defending with energy, and feeding off that confidence, especially after beating Boston 118-89, the scenario that forms is Charlotte controlling stretches of this game. Meanwhile Miami Heat sitting at 33-29 straight up and 14-18 straight up on the road shows that they're capable but not necessarily dominant away from home. So the combination that connects for me is the momentum streak, the 9 straight covers, the 6 straight wins, the confidence coming off that Boston game played in Boston where Charlotte Hornets beat the Celtics 118-89 even on the back end of a back-to-back, and then the market number sitting at Hornets minus 4.5 with the possibility that it could move up a point or two. When those pieces all line up, the path that keeps appearing in my head is Charlotte continuing the run and riding the energy from that Celtics game into another strong performance at home. Yeah, that's why the lean stays at Charlotte Hornets minus 4.5. Quick pause here for a second. If you've got an even one lean you like so far, hit that like button. Seriously, those likes are what tell me these full slate breakdowns are actually helping you guys. And if you're new around here and you like this style where I break down the matchups step by step and think through the games out loud, make sure you subscribe. We're on the road to 2,000 subscribers, and every single one of you getting us a little closer honestly means a lot to the channel. Alright, let's keep rolling with the rest of these games. Next game we have Boston versus Dallas. The lean here is Boston Celtics at home. Okay, the lean here is Boston Celtics at home. Let me walk through why, because when I start laying all these pieces out and just thinking through the paths this game could take, a lot of the details start connecting. First thing I keep coming back to is the overall body of work from Boston. This is a Boston team sitting 41-21 on the year and 3-6-2-5-1 against the number, so when I'm thinking about consistency and performance across the season, that's a pretty strong baseline. Now yeah, the most recent result jumps out immediately. Boston lost 118-89 to Charlotte, and that one looked ugly, right? If this matchup plays out like that Charlotte game did early, that's obviously a problem. In that game Boston fell behind early by double digits, and Charlotte just kept extending it. By halftime Charlotte was up by 21, and from there they basically poured it on the rest of the way. But when I zoom out a little and think through the broader sample, Boston had been drilling teams leading into that result. One path I see here is Boston looking more like the version we saw across their other wins, because even just scanning the margins tells the story. There was a 19-point win over Chicago, and then if I look at the margins around the All-Star stretch, 11, 22, 16, 37, 16, and 27, those are not coin flip games. Those are games where Boston controlled things. Now flip the lens over to Dallas because the scheduling angle here really stands out. Dallas is playing Orlando on Thursday, and then this Boston game lands on Friday, which means this is the second half of a back-to-back for Dallas. The travel path matters too. This is literally Orlando Thursday, right pointing arrow Boston Friday, and if this matchup plays out with tired legs showing up in the second half, that's exactly the kind of spot where that travel starts to show. One path I see here is Dallas trying to keep it competitive early but running into that scheduling wall late. Now the roster situation adds another layer. Cooper Flagg potentially coming back is definitely something I'm thinking about. There's no confirmation Cooper Flagg is back, but he is listed as available on the Dallas injury report, and the timing matters here because the report snapshot was around 6:30 Eastern Thursday. If this matchup plays out with Cooper Flagg actually in the lineup, that changes the tone of Dallas quite a bit. The conversation around Dallas this season has basically been that when Cooper Flagg is available, the team looks noticeably different. But if he doesn't go, that leaves a roster that has already been struggling in a few recent spots. The recent loss margins tell that story pretty clearly. Dallas lost to Charlotte by 27, lost to OKC by 13, and lost to Memphis by 19. And yeah, that OKC game had one interesting wrinkle because Dallas actually covered getting 16.5 against OKC. Which shows they fought a little bit in that spot, but still, those are losses stacking up. Then on the Boston side there's also the possible return factor because Jason Tatum potentially returning later this week is part of the conversation. And if this matchup plays out with Boston getting more scoring help, that's significant because one of the concerns recently has been offensive distribution. The note that really stands out is that Derek White and Jaylen Brown were the double-digit scorers in that Charlotte game, and if this matchup plays out where Boston only has those two producing again, then yeah, Dallas could hang around. But if Boston spreads the scoring like they did in those earlier wins, the 11, 22, 16, 37, 16, 27 margin stretch, that's a completely different feel. What connects for me is just stacking the angles together. Dallas dealing with a back-to-back, the Orlando Thursday right pointing arrow Boston Friday travel, uncertainty around Cooper Flagg, and the fact Boston is 41-21 with 3-6-2-5-1 against the number despite coming off that 118-89 loss to Charlotte where Charlotte led by 21 at halftime. If the game flow looks anything like Boston's stronger stretch, that 19-point win over Chicago and those margins of 11, 22, 16, 37, 16, and 27, the control should tilt Boston's way. Yeah, when I run through every scenario like that, that's why the lean sticks at Boston Celtics at home. Now we have Los Angeles Lakers versus Indiana Pacers. The lean here is Los Angeles Lakers. Okay, the lean here is Los Angeles Lakers, and when I start laying out the situation for Indiana, the paths where they keep this thing competitive get really hard for me to see. Let me walk through it because there are a lot of layers here. First off, the scheduling piece matters right away. The Los Angeles Lakers are on a back-to-back, and they're playing the Denver Nuggets Thursday before this game, so yeah, that's something I have to think about. If this matchup plays out with fatigue showing up for the Lakers after the Denver game, that's one of the few things that could keep Indiana in the picture. But then I look at Indiana's overall profile and that's where things start stacking the other direction. The Pacers come into this sitting 15-47 on the year and 28-34 against the number, and the recent results have been brutal. Their last game was a 130-107 loss to Los Angeles Clippers, and that's part of a stretch where Indiana has now lost 7 in a row straight up and also lost 7 in a row against the spread. If this matchup plays out like the rest of that streak has, that's a major problem because the defensive numbers have been getting out of control. Indiana has allowed 130-plus points in 4 of their last 5 games, and if you include the extra context from the Washington series it becomes 130-plus points in 5 of their last 6 games. That's not a one-off, that's a trend. And the losses themselves haven't been tight either. During this stretch 5 of the last 7 losses have been by double digits, which tells me that when Indiana loses lately, they're getting separated from pretty quickly. Now if I rewind a little bit to the moment before the All-Star break, the record snapshot was 15-40 before the All-Star break, and there were actually a couple small flashes. They had a win versus Brooklyn Nets, and they even had a win versus New York Knicks in New York, which at the time felt like maybe a sign the Pacers could at least show some fight down the stretch. But since then the direction has been the opposite. One path I see here is the Pacers basically leaning into the reality of the season. The conversation around them right now includes the fact that they're not competing for playoffs and there's already talk about NBA draft ping-pong balls, which tells you the organizational mindset might be shifting toward the future. And what's interesting is that the roster itself isn't empty. You still have Tyrese Halliburton, Aaron Nesmith, Andrew Nebbert, and Pascal Siakam in the mix. So if this matchup plays out with those players finding rhythm together, maybe Indiana shows more resistance. But that hasn't been the pattern during this losing streak. Then I look back at the defensive numbers again because they're the loudest signal. 130 plus allowed in 4 of the last 5, 130 plus allowed in 5 of the last 6, 7 straight losses straight up, 7 straight losses against the spread, and 5 of the last 7 losses by double digits. That combination suggests Indiana is struggling to stay competitive for full games right now. Now on the Lakers side there's always the wildcard factor with the roster. The note here is the uncertainty around LeBron and Luka, because there's always the possibility of a rest approach with that team. If this matchup plays out with one of them sitting, or if the rotation gets shortened because of the back-to-back after Denver Thursday, that's the main scenario where the gap could shrink. But if the Lakers roll out a normal lineup, the overall team strength difference becomes pretty clear. What connects for me is that the Pacers' situation combines multiple red flags at once: 15-47, 28-34 against the number, 7 straight losses straight up, 7 straight losses against the spread, a 130-107 loss to Los Angeles Clippers, and the defensive stretch allowing 130-plus in 4 of the last 5 and 130-plus in 5 of the last 6. Add the context of 5 of the last 7 losses by double digits, plus the shift in mindset toward NBA draft ping-pong balls. And it becomes hard for me to map out a path where Indiana consistently keeps pace. So yeah, even with the Los Angeles Lakers on a back-to-back coming off Denver Thursday, when I run through the different scenarios, the direction I keep landing on stays the same. That's why the lean sticks at Los Angeles Lakers. Alright, that wraps it up for all 4 NBA matchups on March 6th. Knicks vs Nuggets, Heat vs Hornets, Celtics vs Dallas, and Lakers vs Pacers. As always, this was analysis and opinion only, nothing guaranteed, just me working through how these games could play out if the situations line up the way they look on paper. Now I'm curious how you guys are seeing the slate tonight, so drop a Z in the comments and tell me which matchup stood out to you the most, or if you're looking at a completely different angle. And if you enjoy these raw, think out loud breakdowns, make sure you like the video and subscribe, because the goal right now is hitting 2,000 subscribers, and we're getting closer every day thanks to you guys. More breakdowns coming soon, same deep dives, same beyond the box score style.